In March of 2020, WAFA, World Flower Association of Flower Arrangers, had their World Flower Show, which comes every 3 years. And it was in India. I was not able to go, but from what I understand from those that did attend, it was a spectacular flower show. I regretted that I couldn't go. So when I first got the assignment, it was called the Maharaja's Jewel. And basically the committee was going to give us a form and gold turban, and we were to create an ornament that a Maharaja would wear. So in researching, I took a look at some of the jewels that they would wear. They were very ornate, and they loved to exhibit their jewels wherever they went. There were different parts to the turban ornament. There's the front part, and often they'd have jewels connecting a side part. So that's what I chose to do. I created my design on a Pages, which is a Apple product on the computer. I'm not very good at hand drawing, so I put together what I wanted to create, and then I took each section individually. So the first section was meant to look like a plume of a bird, bird's feather, which is what these ornaments would represent. They really had a lot of feathers in them and so on. This first section, I started out by outlining the design with rattan, which you can make very pliable with water, and I made the shape, and then I proceeded to create the gems that were going to go into this curved section. So I started out with the mushroom. I'm not going to get into great detail with this. If you want to understand a little bit more of how I do this, you can take a look at the video on botanical arts and go to the section regarding the mushrooms, and it'll show you how I saw them, with a jeweler saw, and so on. But here it is, right here where I'm sawing on the left, and I basically sawed the whole section that would go inside this rattan. I cut it in different pieces. This thing in the upper left-hand corner, this tool is called a sanding stick, and you can find them online. I can put a link on my website. I was sanding my hands more than I was sanding the mushrooms, so you can make your own by putting sandpaper around a small skewer and taping it, but I found these sanding sticks to be quite easy to work with. So I glued each of these separate gems that were going to go inside this bezel of a rattan, and then I made them so that they had the look of a beveled jewel. And then I realized I needed to put some structure on the outside of this section to hold the different seeds of cantaloupes and different melons. They are so fragile, so I knew I needed some support. So I drilled holes in the rattan and put some wire that had been covered in raffia and then twisted, and then put them in each of these holes so that they would eventually support these seeds. So how do you do these seeds? Well, that was a lot of fun. It took forever. But if you take your time, and you have a lot of time to do these seeds are pretty fun to do. You find your gourd or cantaloupe or melon, and you take the seeds out and you clean them. And then you proceed to cut them in half up here in the upper left-hand corner with an X-Acto blade. One of the things I noticed is when I was working with seeds that had dried, they were much more brittle. So I found that even if they were dried, I would wet them in warm water for a few minutes, and they became a lot more pliable and wouldn't disintegrate when I was cutting them. If you want to harvest these, I think it's easier to cut them and to manipulate them if they're fresh and or have just been in warm water. After cutting them in half and shaping them, I then put them on this template, and it was very complicated to get these to turn in such a way that they wouldn't run into each other. That was the hardest part about that. And then I sprayed it with a gray primer just so that anything that I put on top of it would stick. The centerpiece of this ornament was this section here, and in order to produce that, I started with how big was my gem, and then I went and put a bezel around with rattan on top of birch bark there, and then I outlined it with eucalyptus so that it would have a spot for the diamonds I wanted to do. Now here's where I had to add all these seeds that I had hulled out, and I found them to be so brittle that I knew it wasn't going to make it to India. They kept breaking, so I realized I had to put another set of them around just to make them more secure and structurally sound. Really, I thought the effect was good because it was really light and showed. The center stone, I used a mushroom that I sanded down and beveled to look like a gem. gems are on the outside that were supposed to be sapphires, and then the little eucalyptus diamonds, and then that center gem, which is the mushroom. So you're able to use sap and resin type things from plants if you melt them, and you can dye them in international shows. In the United States, we can't use this. We are not able to use byproducts of plants. So this technically wouldn't work in our country, but I loved the colors and the way it looked, each gem in their cantaloupe seeds. The side pieces, I needed to make them a little smaller, so I chose to use cherry pits that I cut in half with a jeweler's saw, and then I sanded them down to this level that I want. And again, you just put it around the outside of this beveled jewel that has a bezel. It's not a lot of B words here, bezel around it. And it came out, and I thought pretty with those little gems again, and then the inside mushroom that looks like an emerald. So here's the design all together. And so when I went to go do the pearls, I knew how long I needed to strand them. I laid out the whole design on a piece of paper. And what I used are soybeans for the pearls. I drill a little hole, put them on a toothpick, and then it's a lot easier. You put a little dab of white glue. You glue them on the toothpick, and you have that secured so that it's easier to paint. Because if you're using nail polish, which is what I use, you can turn the toothpick, and it makes a nice smooth effect. It makes it look like a pearl. To make the spacers, I took pokeweed, and I dried them out, and took a little tiny drill bit and drilled a hole in the center of the pokeweed, which is right in the middle there of the photos. And then I spray painted them gold and used them as spacers. These larger pearls, one's hanging from the top of this section that looks like a feather, and the other's hanging down below. And I'd use pine nuts to resemble this pearl. And to put the gold on the top to accent, I just used pieces of eucalyptus leaves, and I painted them gold to give that effect. So here it is all together, ready to go to India. A friend of ours took it to India, which was so kind, and got it there in shape. She put it on this turban. This is how it looked. And I was happy with it. It wasn't the style that the judges were looking for. The ones that won, I'll show you first place here, is a woman from India. She did a fabulous job. It's a little more fanciful. It's not as much of a realistic looking something that the Maharajia would wear. This is a style they really liked. So this is first place. Look how beautiful those awards were. Would have been fun to have one of those. This is second and third place. So you get an idea of what they liked versus the more realistic one that I did. And this was all written up in the summer issue of By Design, and it's more detailed, and each step is put out there so you can take a look at your leisure. So enjoy.